Good morning and welcome to the lecture on the human body for the EMT class at Flathead Valley Community College. As we work through this chapter, it is important that you realize that once you're done, you will be able to describe and apply in context the body planes, topographical anatomy, directional terms, and anatomic position. You will be able to identify basic anatomic structures and related functions and describe each body system, including the roles of the structures within these systems and the interaction of body systems in maintaining life support chain. You will be able to discuss possible consequences of illness and injury of these structures and systems on proper functioning of the body. We've gone through the preparatory EMS education standard competencies in the past, so I'm going to skip those. For anatomy and physiology specifically, the student should be able to apply fundamental knowledge of anatomy and function of all human systems to the practice of EMS. Regarding pathophysiology, you should be able to apply fundamental knowledge of the pathophysiology of respiration and perfusion to patient assessment and management. One of the most important things to understand is that the EMT must have a working knowledge of anatomy. It is extremely important. This knowledge of anatomy helps to communicate proper information or correct information to professionals who know medical terms and to others who may not understand medical terms. We have to be able to speak the medical language as well as the layperson's language. As we talk about topographic anatomy, the things that you need to remember are that the superficial landmarks serve as guides to structures that lie beneath them. Topographic anatomy applies to the body in the anatomic position so that everyone is referring to the body in the same way. The anatomic position is where your patient stands facing you, arms at their sides, palms forward. The palms are facing you. The planes of the body are imaginary straight lines that divide the body into sections. The three main areas, depending on how the body is divided, are the coronal plane, which is front to back, the transverse or axial plane, which is top to bottom, and the sagittal or lateral plane, which divides into left and right. Here's a great example of this. So as you can see, the frontal or coronal plane takes the body and splits it right down front to back, splits front from back. So you have the anterior, which is the front, and the posterior, which is the back. And this is a coronal plane. The transverse cuts you right across your belly button, top and bottom, to make you into a top half and a lower half. And then the sagittal plane cuts you right down the midline, which goes right through the sternum, down through the belly button vertically, and gives you left and right. As we work through this, you also have to understand that the mid-sagittal plane or the midline is a special type of sagittal plane where the body is cut in half, leaving equal left and right halves. That's the part I was talking about. We also call that the midline. Directional terms are important when discussing injury location or pain radiation. So when we refer to anterior or ventral, that's the front of the body. Posterior or dorsal is the back of the body. Right and left refer to the patient's right or left, not yours. And superior refers to closest to the head, and inferior closest to the feet. We have separate terms for the extremities necessarily, where we call them proximal, which is closest to the point of attachment, and distal, which is furthest from the point of attachment. We have medial, which is closest to the midline, lateral, which is further away from the midline, and then superficial, close to the surface of the skin, and deep is furthest from the skin surface. And this is just a photo example of these. Movement terms we want to talk about. Flexion is the bending of a joint. So when you flex your bicep, you're bending your joint. Extension is the straightening of the joint. Adduction is motion toward the midline, moving toward, and abduction is away from the midline. And the way I always remember abduction is away is when you abduct somebody, you take them away. Again, a great photo example of these terms. Other directional terms that you need to know, you have to understand that many structures are bilateral, meaning they appear on both sides of the midline. For example, the eyes, the ears, the hands, the arms, the legs, the lungs, or the kidneys. Unilateral structures appear on only one side of the body, for example, the spleen or the liver. And then the abdomen is specifically divided into quadrants for communications purposes. And we do a line vertically through the umbilicus and horizontally through the umbilicus to define these quadrants. You have the right upper quadrant, the left upper quadrant, the right lower quadrant, and the left lower quadrant. Here's a great picture again of these determining factors for the lines. And we go pretty much through the umbilicus is where that dividing point is. You can see that here in this picture. So your belly button would be right here, dead center on the bullseye. Some other anatomic positions you need to be aware of. Prone is face down. Supine, we've talked about before, is lying on your back, face up. The shock position, or also known as modified Trendelenburg, is supine with your feet elevated 6 to 12 inches higher than the head. Fowler's position is sitting up with the knees bent, and recovery position is on the left side. You can see each of these pictures, which will give you a better idea. The skeletal system anatomy we need to talk about next. The skeleton gives us our recognizable human form. If it weren't for our skeleton, we would be blobs. It protects our vital internal organs, and it contains bones, which constitute the structure of the skeletal system, ligaments, which connect bones to each other, tendons, which connect muscles to bones, and cartilage, which is the flexible material that is found in the joints. The skeletal system is divided into two portions, and first we'll talk about the axial skeleton, which is the foundation on which the arms and legs are hung. It consists of the skull, the spinal column, and the thorax. The skull consists of the cranium, which is the vault, or which is the protection for the brain. The foramen magnum is the opening at the base of the skull to allow the brain to connect to the spinal cord. It's right here. The cranium is made up of 4 bones. The posterior cranium is called the occiput, which you can see here. More so, you can't see it in the picture on the left. The lateral portions of the cranium are called the temporals or temporal regions. These are right here. These are the green colors here. The cheekbones are the zygomas, which are here, the orange. You can see it here and here, as well as here. The lower movable portion of the jaw, which is the mandible, that's the pink section here. The orbits or eye sockets, which include the zygomas, the maxillae, and frontal bones of the cranium. And the nose has very short bones that form the bridge, and this is the part that can be fractured, otherwise it's cartilage. So this is the fracture part, the nasal bones right here. The rest of this is cartilage. The spinal column is composed of 33 bones called vertebrae. It is the central supporting structure of the body. The vertebrae are named according to the section of the spine where they are. They are numbered from top to bottom, and they're not numbered 1 through 33. They are numbered based on the sections. 5 sections from top to bottom. The cervical spine or neck consists of 7 vertebrae, 1 through 7, C1 through C7. The thoracic spine or upper back is 12, so they're numbered T1 through 12, and they attach it to the ribs. So that's 12 vertebrae, 12 pairs of ribs. The lumbar spine or low back is 5 vertebrae, which are L1 through L5. And then the sacrum is the back wall of the pelvis, and that's 5 vertebrae, S1 through 5. And these are more fused together, as you can see in the picture. They're not really independent vertebrae like you see in the other sections. And then the coccyx or tailbone, which is 4 fused vertebrae down at the very bottom, right here. The thorax is formed by the 12 thoracic vertebrae and the 12 pairs of ribs. The thoracic cavity contains the heart, the lungs, the esophagus, and the great vessels. It is the midline of the chest, front is the sternum, and that is made up of 3 parts, and we want to talk about these because their parts are very important. This is the jugular notch. This is the manubrium. This kind of looks like the knot on a tie if you look at it. This is the body of the sternum. And this is the xiphoid process, which is a flexible little piece down at the very bottom. The next section is the appendicular skeleton, which consists of the arms, the legs, their connection points, and the pelvis. It includes the upper extremities, the pelvis, and lower extremities. Your upper extremity extends from your shoulder girdle to your fingertips. It is composed of arms, forearms, hands, and fingers. The shoulder girdle is where three bones come together. These are the clavicle or collarbone, found here. This is the sternum we just talked about. So this is the sternoclavicular joint. This is the acromioclavicular joint, the AC joint. You have the glenohumeral shoulder joint here, the scapula, and the humerus. So the three bones are the clavicle, the humerus, and the scapula joined together. And that allows the arm to be moved. The arm, the humerus is the supporting bone of the arm. The forearm consists of the radius and the ulna. The radius is on the lateral side and the ulna is on the medial side. The other thing is the radius is on the thumb side, the ulna is on the fifth finger side. As you can see here, ulna here, fifth finger, thumb, radius, because it turns, that bone actually rotates or radiates. The wrist and the hand is a ball and socket type joint, and the principal bones are the carpals, the metacarpals, and the phalanges. Metatarsals are the foot bones. The pelvis is a closed bony ring consisting of three bones. The sacrum, two pelvic bones. Each of the pelvic bone is formed by fusion of the ilium, the ischium, and the pubis. These three bones are joined posteriorly by the sacrum, and anteriorly the right and left pubis are joined by a hard, bony, and cartilaginous joint with minimal motion. This area is called the pubic symphysis. You can see that here. This is the pubic symphysis. This is the pubis bone on the patient's left, pubis bone on the patient's right. The ischium are the bones at the bottom, and the big wings are the iliums. And this is the iliac crest, is where it wings off. And here's your sacrum. The lower extremity, the main parts are the thigh, leg, and foot. The femur is the upper leg, also known as the thigh bone. It's the longest, strongest bone in the body. At the superior head of the bone is a round ball-like structure called the femoral head. The femoral head is where the femur connects into the acetabulum, which is the pelvic girdle, by a ball and socket joint. The femur has two projections where major muscles of the thigh connect to the femur. These are called the greater trochanter, which is lateral superior, and the lesser trochanter, which is medial superior. The knee connects the upper leg to the lower leg, and then you have the kneecap or patella. The lower leg consists of the tibia, which is your shin on the anterior portion of the leg, and then the fibula, which is to the back and lateral. You can see these bones here. Here's your pelvis. Here's your femoral head. Your greater trochanter here, and your lesser trochanter here. This is your femur or thigh bone, your patella or kneecap, your knee joint, your tibia, your shin bone, your fibula laterally on the outside, and then we come down to the foot and ankle. The ankle is a hinge joint. It allows flexion and extension of the foot. And then the foot contains 7 tarsal bones. The talus and calcaneus are the largest of these bones. The calcaneus is your heel. The talus is just above that. The 5 metatarsal bones form the substance of the foot, and the 5 toes are formed by 14 phalanges. 2 phalanges are found in the great toe, and then 3 phalanges are found in each of the smaller toes. These are phalanges, metatarsals, and these are the tarsal bones. You have your Achilles tendon that comes off the back and connects to your heel, and your medial malleolus, the inside, the lateral malleolus is the outside of your ankle. Joints occur wherever 2 long bones come in contact with each other. Joints consist of the ends of the bones and the surrounding connecting and supporting tissue. There are 2 types of joints: hinge joints, which motion is restricted to one plane, so your elbow is a hinge joint, and ball and socket joint, which allow rotation and bending. And an example of this is your shoulder, as you can rotate it 360 degrees and you can bend it up and down. As we discuss the physiology of this, these are pictures of those 2 types of joints. As we discuss the physiology of the skeletal system, you have to understand that there are 5 things you need to know. It gives your body shape. As I said, without the skeletal system, you'd be a blob. It provides protection for your fragile internal organs. It allows for movement. It stores calcium, and it helps manufacture and create blood cells. The musculoskeletal system provides form, upright posture, and movement. We have more than 600 muscles in the body that attach to the bones of the skeleton. These are called skeletal or voluntary muscle. It's also called voluntary muscle because it is under direct voluntary control of your brain. The skeletal muscles are attached directly to bones by tough, rope-like cords of tissue called tendons. You can see this is an example of voluntary muscle movement controlled by the brain. Signal sent makes you move your arm. Other types of muscle outside of the musculoskeletal system include smooth muscle and cardiac muscle. You can see examples of the three types of muscles here. Most muscles of the body operate on the principle of antagonistic parts. For example, the biceps work to slow the movement of the triceps as the arm is extended. This is how this works. Here is a complete picture of the musculoskeletal system. As I said, remember, more than 600 muscles. You don't need to know all of them, but you do need to know some of them. Specifically the calf muscle, the gastrocnemius, the quadriceps, the vastus muscle, which is part of the quadriceps, the trapezius, the deltoid, the biceps, the triceps, the gluteus maximus, which is the muscles of the buttocks, the major muscle where we do injections. The physiology of the musculoskeletal system involves contraction and relaxation, which makes it possible to move and manipulate the environment. A byproduct of this movement is heat. When you get cold, you shiver. This is an involuntary muscle movement, and it produces heat. Another function of muscles is to protect the structures underneath them. The respiratory system anatomy consists of structures of the body that contribute to respiration, which is the process of breathing. And here you can see the portions of the respiratory system, the anatomy. The upper airway consists of the nose, the mouth, the tongue, the jaw, and the oral cavity. Then there is the pharynx, which is composed of the nasopharynx, the oropharynx, and the laryngopharynx. The laryngopharynx, at the base of this, are two lumens, the larynx anteriorly, and the esophagus posteriorly. The epiglottis is a valve that prevents food and liquid from entering the trachea. The larynx is the dividing line between the upper and the lower airway. The Adam's apple or thyroid cartilage is the anterior part of the larynx, and the cricoid cartilage or cricoid ring lies inferiorly to the thyroid cartilage, and it forms the lowest portion of the larynx. I do recommend that you be familiar with this because if you move on to paramedic training, these are important landmarks that we use. The lower airway, also the trachea or the windpipe, is approximately 5 inches long, and it is a semi-rigid enclosed air tube. It ends at the carina and divides into two tubes, the right and left mainstem bronchi, which enter the lungs and branch into smaller airways. The final divisions of the bronchi are called bronchioles. The two lungs are held in place by the trachea, the arteries and veins, and the pulmonary ligaments. Each lung is divided into two lobes. The right lung has an upper, middle, and lower lobe. The left lung has an upper and lower lobe. Within the lobes are the bronchi and bronchioles, which end in small grape-like sacs called the alveoli. And the alveoli allow for gas exchange of oxygen and carbon dioxide. The lungs are covered by smooth, glistening tissue called the pleura, and the muscles are needed to make the lungs expand and contract. Again, pictures here. I always tell my students that the respiratory system, this lower airway portion, as well as the lungs, kind of look like an upside down tree. And if you think about the anatomy, here you have your trunk, and then you have your main branches. These are your left and right mainstem bronchus. And then you move off into your bronchioles, which are your smaller, which end in even smaller. And at the end of these very small branches, you have the leaf-like, or the grape-like structures called the alveoli, which are your leaves. The muscles of breathing involve the diaphragm. It is the primary muscle of breathing, and it divides the thorax from the abdomen. Its anatomic function is breathing. During inhalation, the diaphragm contracts, enlarging the chest cavity, decreasing the pressure in the lungs, and moving air in. During exhalation, the diaphragm relaxes, decreasing the chest activity, increasing the pressure in the lungs, and moving air out. The intercostal muscles during inhalation, they contract, moving the ribs up and out, enlarging the chest cavity, decreasing the pressure in the lungs, and moving air in. During exhalation, the intercostal muscles relax, decreasing the chest activity, increasing the pressure in the lungs, and moving air out. And then also the abdominal muscles and pectoral muscles are involved. As you can see from this animation, it talks about during inhalation, the diaphragm and intercostal muscles contract, and during exhalation, the diaphragm and intercostal muscles relax. Inhalation is an active process, while exhalation is a passive process. And you can see the diaphragm moving upward and then moving downward. The respiratory system physiology. The respiratory system's function is to provide the body with oxygen and eliminate carbon dioxide. Ventilation and respiration are two separate interdependent functions of the respiratory system. Respiration is the exchange of oxygen and carbon dioxide in the alveoli and in tissues of the body. Diffusion is the passive process in which oxygen molecules move from an area with a higher concentration of oxygen molecules to an area of lower concentration. The brainstem automatically controls breathing if levels of carbon dioxide or oxygen in arterial blood are too high or too low. One of the best protected parts of this is one of the best protected parts of the nervous system, and the hypoxic drive is the backup system that controls your breathing. It is less sensitive and less powerful than the carbon dioxide sensors in the brainstem. The medulla keeps us breathing so we do not have to think about it. It initiates the ventilation cycles, it is stimulated by high carbon dioxide levels, and it has two main portions, the dorsal respiratory group, or DRG, which initiates inspiration and sets our pattern of respirations, and the ventral respiratory group, or VRG, which provides for forced inspiration or expiration as needed. Play this one more time. You can see the signal being sent from the brainstem to the diaphragm, which stimulates inspiration and exhalation. Oxygen and carbon dioxide is exchanged in alveoli and tissue. Oxygen enters, carbon dioxide leaves. Ventilation is simple air movement into and out of the lungs, as you can see here. You provide ventilation when you administer oxygen. Tidal volume is the amount of air moved into or out of the lungs in a single breath. The residual volume is the gas that remains in the lungs and keeps the lungs open. The term dead space is the portion of the respiratory system that has no alveoli and therefore little or no exchange of gas between air and blood occurs. It's dead. And then minute volume is the amount of air that moves in and out of the lungs in 1 minute minus the dead space. So the formula for this is respiratory rate times tidal volume will equal minute volume. Characteristics of normal breathing. Normal rate and depth or tidal volume are one of the characteristics. Regular rhythm or pattern of inhalation and exhalation is another. You also need good audible breath sounds on both sides of the chest, regular rise and fall movement on both sides of the chest, and movement of the abdomen. These are all the things that you should see in normal breathing. Inadequate breathing in adults appears in these following ways. The patient may experience labored breathing. This requires effort and may involve accessory muscle use. Breath sounds may actually be diminished or absent. Muscle retractions above the clavicles, between the ribs, and below the rib cage, especially seen in children. The skin may be pale or cyanotic, which is a blue discoloration, and it can also be cool, damp, or clammy. The patient may be in the tripod position, which is leaning forward on arms that are outstretched. And then there may be agonal respirations, which is gasping breaths that do not support life. The circulatory system anatomy is a complex arrangement of connected tubes. This is also known as the cardiovascular system. The two circuits, first of all, the tubes are the arteries, the arterioles, the capillaries, the venules, and the veins. The two circuits are first systemic circulation, which provides circulation and oxygenation to the body. It carries oxygen-rich blood from the left ventricle through the body and back to the right atrium. And then the pulmonary circulation is the lungs, and it carries oxygen-poor blood from the right ventricle through the lungs and back to the left atrium. Here is a great graphic representing the circulatory system anatomy. The heart is a hollow muscular organ the size of an adult's clenched fist. It is made of specialized cardiac muscle called the myocardium. It basically works as a double pump. The septum divides it into the right and left sides. Each side is then divided into the atrium, which is the upper chamber, and the ventricle, which is the lower chamber. Circulation is happening when the heart receives its blood from the aorta. You have to realize what we're talking about here is that is the muscle of the heart itself, not the blood that is actually circulated. The muscle of the heart itself, as the blood leaves the left ventricle, oxygenated blood, there are coronary arteries that come off right at the aorta. The right side receives blood from veins, and this is the right side of the pump, receives blood from the veins, and that comes back through the two main vessels, the superior and inferior vena cava. And then the left side of the heart receives blood from the lungs, and that is oxygenated blood, and those come back from the pulmonary veins. So the right side of the heart, superior vena cava, receives oxygen-poor blood from the head and upper body. The inferior also receives it from the lower body. And that blood goes into the right atrium. And from the right atrium, blood then travels out the right pulmonary artery to the right lung and the left pulmonary artery to the left lung. These are the only arteries in the body that carry oxygen-poor blood. The way to remember that arteries carry blood away from the heart and veins carry blood back to the heart. Then you have your right ventricle. This goes from the right atrium, right ventricle, and then out to the pulmonary arteries. As the blood is returned through the pulmonary vein, it comes back into the left atrium and then to the left ventricle and is then pumped out the aorta. And off these three vessels, these two carry oxygen-rich blood, or all three of them, to the head and upper body as well as the coronary arteries. And then the aorta arches and travels downward through the thorax and the abdomen, carrying blood to the rest of the body. Oxygen-rich blood is the color red. Oxygen-poor blood, they show in the color blue here. And remember, it travels across the one-way valves. And these valves prevent the backflow of blood, and when a valve controlling the entry to the heart chamber is open, the valve that controls the exit is shut, and vice versa. Normal heart rate resting is 60 to 100 beats a minute in an adult. Children have a rate of 70 to 140 beats a minute, toddlers 90 to 150 beats a minute, and infant 100 to 160 beats a minute. Stroke volume is the amount of blood moved by one beat of the heart, and cardiac output is the amount of blood moved in 1 minute. So we express this in the formula of cardiac output is equal to heart rate times stroke volume. In 1 minute, the body's entire blood volume of 5 to 6 liters is circulated through all the vessels. The electrical conduction network of the heart is specialized. It's a network of specialized tissue that is capable of conducting electrical current runs through the heart. The flow of current causes smooth, coordinated heart contractions. The contractions produce the pumping action of the heart, and each mechanical contraction is associated with 2 electrical processes. Depolarization, in which electrical charges on the surface of the muscle cell change from positive to negative, And then repolarization is in which the heart returns to its resting state and the positive charge is restored to the surface. Electrical impulses begin high in the atria at the sinoatrial node. They travel to the atrioventricular node and bundle of His and then move through the Purkinje fibers to the ventricles. This movement produces a smooth flow of electricity, producing a coordinated pumping action. The heart's electrical system becomes disturbed if part of the heart is oxygen deficient, injured, or dies. Arteries carry blood from the heart to all the body tissues. Arteries away. The aorta is the principal artery leaving the left side of the heart and carrying freshly oxygenated blood to the body. It divides at the level of the umbilicus into the iliac arteries. Arteries then branch into arterioles, and arterioles branch to capillaries. And a pulse is created by blood pumping out of the left ventricle into these major arteries. The pulmonary arteries are originating at the right ventricle, and they carry oxygen-poor blood to the lungs. The carotid artery is the major artery of the neck. It supplies the head and the brain with blood, and it is a palpation site for a pulse on either side of the neck. The femoral artery is found in the thigh, and it is the major artery of the thigh. It supplies your lower extremities with blood, and it is a palpation site for pulse in the groin area, which is the crease between the abdomen and the thigh. The posterior tibial, or lower leg, is a palpation site for a pulse of the posterior surface of the medial malleolus. The dorsalis pedis is a palpation site for pulse on the anterior surface of the foot. The brachial artery is the major artery of the upper extremity, and it supplies blood to the arm. It is a palpation site for pulse on the inside of the arm between the elbow and the shoulder. We use this when determining blood pressure with a BP cuff and a stethoscope. The radial artery is the major artery of the lower arm, and it is a palpation site for pulse at the thumb side of the wrist. As I said, arteries then branch into smaller arteries and then into arterioles, and they branch into smaller vessels until they connect to the vast network of capillaries. Arteries contract to accommodate for loss of blood volume and to increase blood pressure, and arterioles are the smallest branches of an artery leading to the capillaries. Capillaries are tiny blood vessels that connect arterioles to venules. The fine end divisions of the arterial system are found here, and this allows contact between blood and the cells. And there are billions of capillaries in the body. Veins return oxygen-depleted blood to the heart. The major veins are the vena cava, and it is two separate sections. The superior vena cava carries blood returning from the head, neck, shoulders, and upper extremities, and the inferior vena cava carries blood from the abdomen, pelvis, and lower extremities. These two veins connect and join at the right atrium. The spleen is a solid organ located under the rib cage in the left upper quadrant. It is actually a filter for blood, and worn-out blood cells, foreign substances, and bacteria are filtered here. It is highly vascular and particularly susceptible to injury from blunt force trauma, and this can lead to severe internal bleeding. Blood composition. Blood is comprised of plasma, which is the liquid portion of the blood, and it contains water, which is a primary component, proteins, also a primary component, oxygen, carbon dioxide, nitrogen, nutrients, and cellular wastes. Red blood cells are also known as erythrocytes, and they contain hemoglobin, which provides blood its color and it carries oxygen. And white blood cells are also known as leukocytes, and they play a role in the body's immune defense to fight infection. Platelets are essential in the initial formation of a blood clot. The physiology of the circulatory system. Blood pressure is pressure that blood exerts against the walls of the arteries. When the left ventricle of the heart contracts, it pumps blood from ventricle into the aorta. This is called systole. When muscles of the ventricle relaxes, the ventricle fills with blood, and this is called diastole. Blood pressure readings are consistent with using the systolic and diastolic numbers. Systolic blood pressure is the high point of wave as the heart is contracting, and diastolic is the low point of wave as the heart is in relaxation. This can be measured with a blood pressure cuff, also called a sphygmomanometer, and it is expressed in mmHg, or millimeters of mercury. Normal circulation in adults is automatically adjusted and controlled. Perfusion is the circulation of blood in an organ or tissue in adequate amounts to meet the current needs of the cells. Blood enters organs and tissues through arteries, and it leaves through veins. If there is inadequate circulation in adults, the system can make adjustments to a small blood loss, and the vessels will constrict and the heart will pump faster. If the loss is large, adjustment fails and the patient goes into shock. Shock is also called hypoperfusion and is the inadequate circulation of blood through an organ or tissue. Blood has several functions. Some of these functions include fighting infection, transporting oxygen, transporting carbon dioxide, controlling pH, transporting wastes and nutrients, and clotting, which is the coagulation piece. The nervous system has some control of the cardiovascular system. The sympathetic nervous system is responsible for the fight or flight response. It sends commands to your adrenal glands, and epinephrine and norepinephrine are then secreted. These are neurotransmitters, and these stimulate heart and blood vessels. The popular names of these hormones are adrenaline and noradrenaline. Blood vessels have alpha-adrenergic receptors, and when these are stimulated, the vessels will constrict, which increases blood pressure. The heart and lungs have beta-adrenergic receptors, and when these are stimulated, the heart rate will increase, and the bronchi in the lungs dilate, allowing more air to be inhaled and exhaled. This is all part of the fight or flight response. The parasympathetic nervous system, on the other hand, addresses actions that do not require immediate response. When stimulated, this system causes the heart to slow and beat more weakly. The opposition between the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system allows the body to respond appropriately. The nervous system is perhaps the most complex organ in the body, and it is composed of two major structures, and that is the brain and the spinal cord. The central nervous system is the controlling brain is the controlling organ of the body, and the major subdivisions of the brain are the cerebrum, which is the largest part of the brain, and the four lobes that are each responsible for a specific function, such as hearing, balance, and speech. And it controls the activities of the opposite side of the body. So the right side of the brain controls the left side of the body. The cerebellum, which coordinates body movements, and the brainstem. The brainstem controls body functions necessary for life, including cardiac and respiratory function and regulation of consciousness. It is comprised of three areas: the midbrain, the pons, and the medulla oblongata. The spinal cord is an extension of the brain. It transmits information between the brain and the body, and CSF fluid cushions the brain and the spinal cord. Here you see a nice chart that talks about all the parts of the body and all of the controlling parts and how it works. The spinal cord is a continuation of the brain, and it transmits information between the brain and the body. CSF, or cerebrospinal fluid, cushions the brain and spinal cord. Here you have your picture of your spinal cord. It exits the foramen magnum of the brain, exits the brain through the foramen magnum, and goes down, travels down through the vertebral bodies. As you watch this animation, think about what it's showing you. The peripheral nervous system is divided into two main portions, the somatic and the autonomic nervous system. It consists of long fibers that extend from the cell body out through openings in the bony covering to form a cable of nerve fibers that link the central nervous system to the various organs of the body. The peripheral nervous system, as I said, is divided into two main portions. Somatic, which is voluntary, which transmits signals from the brain to voluntary muscles. It allows for activities such as walking, talking, and writing. The autonomic nervous system is involuntary, and it controls involuntary action necessary for basic body functions. These body functions include digestion, dilation, constriction of blood vessels, and it's split into two areas: the sympathetic, which is responsible for fight or flight, and the parasympathetic, which slows down the body. The two types of nerves found within the peripheral nervous system are sensory nerves, which carry information from the body to the central nervous system. It's constantly providing information to the brain about what different parts of the body are doing in relation to their surroundings. And then motor nerves carry information from CNS to muscles. Each muscle in the body has its own motor nerve. and electrical impulses produced by cell bodies in the spinal cord are transmitted along the motor nerves to the muscle, causing it to contract. The integumentary system, or the skin, consists of two layers, the epidermis, which is superficial, and the dermis, which is the deeper layer. And below that skin lies subcutaneous tissue, which is a layer of fat below the skin that serves as an insulator and as an energy reservoir. Sweat glands produce sweat for cooling the body. Sebaceous glands secrete sebum, which provides waterproofing and softening. Hair follicles are small organs that produce hair, and blood vessels provide nutrients and oxygen to the skin. Mucous membranes cover bodily orifices such as the mouth, the nose, and the vagina. And mucous membranes provide a protective barrier like skin, and they secrete mucus, a watery substance that lubricates the openings. Mucous membranes are usually very moist, where the skin is very dry. It is the largest single organ in the body, and it has three major functions. It is to protect the body from the environment, it is to regulate temperature, and transmit information from the environment to the brain. In a cold environment, blood vessels in the skin constrict and blood is shunted away from the surface, decreasing the amount of heat lost through radiation from the body surface. If you're in a warm environment, the vessels in the skin dilate, the skin becomes flushed or red, and heat radiates from the body surface. Sweat is secreted to the skin surface from the sweat glands, and sweating alone will not reduce body temperature. Evaporation of the sweat must also occur for this to happen. The digestive system. The function of the system is digestion, the processing of food that nourishes the individual cells of the body. It's also called the GI system. It consists of the abdomen, which is the second major body cavity, containing major organs of digestion and excretion. Quadrants are easiest ways to identify the areas. The right upper quadrant contains the liver, the gallbladder, and a portion of the colon. The left upper quadrant contains the stomach, the spleen, and a portion of the colon. The right lower quadrant contains two portions of the large intestine, the cecum, which is where the appendix is attached, and the ascending colon, and the left lower quadrant, which contains the descending and sigmoid portions of the colon. We always refer to the right and left as the patient's right and left. The small intestine, the pancreas, the large intestine, and urinary bladder lie in more than one quadrant. So these are all things that are part of that, but they can be found in multiple quadrants. The mouth consists of the lips, the cheeks, the gums, the teeth, and the tongue. There are also salivary glands that produce 1.5 liters of saliva daily, and it serves as a binder and as a lubricant. The oropharynx is a tubular structure which extends from the back of the mouth to the esophagus and trachea, and the esophagus is a collapsible tube about 10 inches long. It extends from the end of the pharynx to the stomach, and the muscles in the wall of the esophagus propel food to the stomach. The stomach is a hollow organ found in the left upper quadrant. It receives food and stores it, and provides for movement into the bowel. And the pancreas are a flat solid organ that lies below and behind the liver and stomach and behind the peritoneum. It contains two kinds of glands, exocrine and endocrine. Exocrine glands secrete pancreatic juice containing enzymes that aid in digestion of fat, starch, and protein. The other portion of the gland is endocrine, called islets of Langerhans, where insulin is produced. The liver is a large solid organ immediately beneath the diaphragm in the right upper quadrant, extending into the left upper quadrant. It is the largest solid organ in the abdomen, and it is made up of a large mass of blood vessels and cells. It has many functions, including filtering harmful substances, forming the factors needed for blood clotting and normal plasma production. It is the principal organ for storing sugar or starch for immediate use by the body for energy. It contains bile ducts, and the major function of bile is the digestion of fat, and bile ducts connect the liver to the intestine. The gallbladder is the outpouching from the bile ducts that serves as a reservoir and concentrating organ for bile produced in the liver. The small intestine is a major hollow organ of the abdomen. It produces enzymes and mucus to aid within digestion. It's composed of the duodenum, the jejunum, and the ileum. The large intestine is a major hollow organ consisting of the cecum, the colon, and the rectum. The major function of the colon is to absorb the final 5 to 10% of digested food and water from the intestine to form solid stool. The rectum, which is the lowermost end of the colon, is a large hollow organ that stores feces until it is expelled. The appendix is a tube 3 to 4 inches long that opens into the cecum. This is the first part of the large intestine in the right lower quadrant of the abdomen. It may easily become obstructed, inflamed, or infected, and this is called appendicitis, and it is one of the major causes of severe abdominal distress. As I said, the rectum is the lowermost end of the colon. It is a large hollow organ adapted to hold quantities of feces until it is expelled. At its terminal end is the anus, and both the rectum and anus have sphincters, which are complex circular muscles that control the escape of liquids, gases, and solids from within the digestive tract. So the physiology of the digestive system tells us that enzymes are added to food by our salivary glands, the stomach, the liver, the pancreas, and the small intestine. These enzymes convert food into basic sugars, fatty acids, and amino acids, and these are further processed by the liver and circulated via blood throughout the body. The endocrine system. The endocrine system is a complex message and control system. It integrates many bodily functions, and endocrine glands release hormones directly into the bloodstream. Some of the examples are epinephrine, norepinephrine, and insulin. It controls the release of hormones in the body. Each endocrine gland produces one or more hormones, and each hormone has a specific effect on some organ, tissue, or process. For example, the adrenal glands regulate stress response and fight or flight. They secrete epinephrine and norepinephrine. The ovaries regulate sexual function in women and characteristics of and reproduction. The pancreas regulate glucose metabolism and other functions. The parathyroid regulates serum calcium. The pituitary regulates all of the other endocrine glands and is also known as the master gland. The testes regulate sexual function, characteristics, and reproduction in men. And the thyroid gland regulates metabolism. The brain controls the release of hormones, and the result is a tightly controlled system of communications using primary and secondary feedback loops to keep the body in balance. Excesses or deficiencies in hormones can cause disease processes such as diabetes. The urinary system. It controls the discharge of certain waste materials filtered from the blood by the kidneys. The kidneys are solid organs. The ureters, bladder, and urethra are hollow organs, and the main functions of the urinary system are control fluid balance within the body, filter and eliminate waste, and control pH. The body has two kidneys that lie in the retroperitoneal space, and they rid the blood of toxic waste products and controls balance of water and salt. Large vessels attach the kidneys directly to the aorta and the inferior vena cava. A ureter passes from each kidney to drain into the urinary bladder, and the urinary bladder is located immediately behind the pubic symphysis in the pelvic cavity. The bladder empties to the outside of the body through the urethra. The genital system, anatomy and physiology, controls the reproductive processes by which life is created. The male reproductive system consists of the testes, the epididymis, the vas deferens, and the penis. The female reproductive system consists of the ovaries, fallopian tubes, uterus, cervix, and vagina. Here's an example of the male system. An example of the female system. Male sex organs are contained on the outside, or are found on the outside of the body, and the female organs are found on the inside. The life support chain. You have to realize that all cells of the body require oxygen, nutrients, and removal of waste. The circulatory system is the carrier of these supplies and wastes. If interference occurs, the cells will then become damaged and die. ATP, or adenosine triphosphate, is involved in energy metabolism. It is used to store energy. Aerobic metabolism uses oxygen. The term aerobic means with oxygen. Cells switch to anaerobic metabolism when you have limited oxygen, and then lactic acid is a damaging waste product of this process, and it will build up. Movement of oxygen, waste, and nutrients occurs by diffusion. And pH is critical to diffusion. pH is a measure of acidity or alkalinity, and your body spends a large amount of energy to maintain normal pH. Pathophysiology is the study of functional changes that occur when the body reacts to disease. Many diseases can occur in patients. Diabetes is a disease of the pancreas, and a stroke is a disease of the brain. Pneumonia is a disease of the lungs, and respiratory compromise can lead to shock and an alteration of cellular metabolism. You have to realize that specific pathophysiologic changes occur with specific diseases, and we will discuss these individually in the medical chapters found in your text. In summary, to properly care for your patients, you must have a thorough understanding of human anatomy and physiology so you can assess the patient's condition and communicate with hospital personnel and other healthcare providers. You must be able to identify superficial landmarks of the body and know what lies underneath the skin so that you can perform an accurate assessment. The skeleton gives the body its recognizable human form through a collection of bones, ligaments, tendons, and cartilage. The skeletal system provides protection for fragile organs, allows for movement, and gives the body its shape. The contraction and relaxation of the musculoskeletal system gives the body its ability to move. The respiratory system consists of all the structures of the body that contribute to the process of breathing. It includes the nose, the mouth, the throat, the larynx, the trachea, the bronchi, and the bronchioles. The function of the respiratory system is to provide the body with oxygen and eliminate carbon dioxide. The circulatory system is a complex arrangement of connected tubes, including arteries, arterioles, capillaries, venules, and veins. The nervous system is perhaps the most complex organ system within the human body. It consists of the brain, the spinal cord, and nerves. The skin is divided into two parts, the superficial epidermis, which is composed of several layers of cells, and the deeper dermis, which contains the specialized skin structures. The skin is the largest single organ in the body. It serves three major functions: to protect the body from its environment, to regulate the temperature of the body, and to transmit information from the environment to the brain. The digestive system is composed of the gastrointestinal tract, the stomach and intestines, including the mouth, the salivary glands, the pharynx, the esophagus, the liver, the gallbladder, the pancreas, the rectum, and the anus. Digestion of food from the time it is taken into the mouth until essential compounds are extracted and delivered by the circulatory system to nourish all the cells in the body is a very complicated chemical process. The endocrine system is a complex message and control system that integrates many body functions. The urinary system controls the discharge of certain waste materials filtered from the blood by the kidneys. The genital system controls reproductive processes by which life is created. And pathophysiology is the study of how the body reacts to diseases. The next chapter that we're going to cover for this class on Wednesday is the chapter involving lifespan development. Thank you.